In 1946, prices in Hungary were doubling every 15 hours. Not every month, not every week, every 15 hours. This is the absolute worst inflation ever recorded in human history. And most people, they've never even heard of it. Now, here's why I'm telling you this, because in my last two videos, we talked about Venezuela, Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and who's actually in control of the global economy. Remember, we were looking for the adults in the room. And a bunch of you dropped dollar in the comments and said, hey, what happens when a country actually loses its grip on the dollar dominance? So today, I'm going to answer that question, not with theory, not with predictions, but with history, because you guys seem to be enjoying these videos. And to be honest, I'm enjoying making them. Because this has happened before, multiple times to multiple countries. Some of them were even superpowers. And by the end of this video, you're going to see a pattern that should concern every single one of us. I'll show you exactly where we are on that pattern right now. I'm Coach Carroll. Welcome back to another video. The setup. If you haven't seen the Venezuela and Iran videos, go watch those first. They'll give you context for everything that we're about to talk about. But the short version is this. For about 50 years, the deal was simple. Oil trades in US dollars, the dollar stays king, and that's what we call the petrodollar system. As long as that held, the United States could print money, run deficits, and maintain the most powerful currency on earth. This should answer the question, does our debt actually matter? And in short, up to this point, no, it hasn't. Because when you're the supreme ruler, you can print as much money as you want. But that system is under pressure right now from multiple directions all at once. And the question everyone keeps asking is, what happens if it actually breaks? Sure, senators and congressmen love to make it a talking point that we've got to fix the national debt. We don't want to kick the can down the road. We don't want to pass this to our grandchildren, right? But up to this point, it hasn't mattered. But there's a real threat now. And so what happens if the dollar is no longer supreme? Well, we don't have to guess, because things like this have been broken before in other countries, in other currencies. And the results, they're devastating. So let me walk you through what actually happened when other currencies died. And then let's compare that to where we are today. Weimar Germany. Let's start with the most famous one, Germany, 1923. After World War I, Germany owed massive war reparations that they simply could not afford to pay. So the government did what governments always do when they're in trouble. They turned on the money printer. A lot of money. At the start of 1922, a loaf of bread cost about 160 marks. By November of 1923, just about a year later, year and a half later, less than 2 years, I guess, November 1923. So we might round it up. We're all friends here. Let's call it a rounding error. So 2 years later, that same loaf of bread went from 160 marks to 200 billion with a B marks. Okay, roll clip 1 of the Weimar archive footage. That's real footage from 1923. People literally needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to go buy freaking groceries. And here's the part that always gets me personally, on a personal level, if you will. It got so bad that German families were burning their paper money to heat their homes in winter because the marks were cheaper than firewood. The currency was literally worth less than the paper that it was printed on. Kids were playing with stacks of money like building blocks because it had no value. At the peak, $1 US was worth 1 trillion German marks. Now, I want you to hold that number in your head as we go through these next few examples, okay? 1 trillion German marks. Like, that's massive, okay? Like, imagine your savings being worth nothing overnight. Here's the worst ever, though. Hungary. Germany wasn't even the worst case. That title belongs to Hungary in 1946. After World War II, Hungary's economy was completely destroyed. Half their factories were gone, their transportation system was wrecked, and they had no tax base to fund the rebuilding. So they just printed money. They made it up. Sound familiar? And the inflation also followed. It was extreme, so extreme that it holds the Guinness World Record for the worst hyperinflation record in history. At its peak in July of 1946, Hungary's monthly, not yearly, monthly inflation rate hit 4.18 quintillion percent. 4.18 quintillion percent, okay? I'm not even going to try to explain how big that number is or how many zeros it would be. Just know that prices were doubling every 15 hours. When they finally introduced a new currency, the forint, right? New currency evolves. Crypto. Hold on. They set the exchange rate at 400 trillion pingo to one forint. That's a 4 followed by 29 zeros, okay? Now, that's an extreme example, but the cause was exactly the same. A country that couldn't pay its bills decided to print its way out of the problem. Now, let's look at one that happened in our lifetimes. Zimbabwe in 2008. Roll clip number 2, Zimbabwe's new footage. Zimbabwe's government printed money to fund land reform programs and military operations, and the inflation spiral that followed became almost absurd. They printed $100 trillion bill, like $100 trillion on a single bill, okay? Crazy. $100 trillion and $100 trillion. And it couldn't buy you a bus pass ticket. At the peak, Zimbabwe's monthly inflation rate was 79.6 billion percent. By 2009, they just gave up. They stopped printing their own currency entirely and started using the US dollar and South African rand instead, okay? Do you see the pattern here? Their own money became worthless, so they abandoned it and adopt the US dollar. And we don't have to go back that far. Venezuela, even in 2018. At the peak, Venezuela was running 10,500% annual inflation. Their currency, the Bolivar, became so worthless that people were braiding the bills into handbags and selling them on the streets because the 1,000 bills woven into a purse was worth more as a handbag than it was as actual money. Can you imagine if somebody took $100 bills and wove them into a purse because it was worth more as a purse than the cash? It's crazy. It's not an exaggeration. That's a real thing that actually happened. And then there's Argentina. Argentina hit 292% inflation in August of 2024. Like, this is not something that's like, oh yeah, DJ, that's World War I. You don't understand, coach. That was a long time ago. Like, nah, bro, 2 years ago. Their president, Milei, came in with a chainsaw. You guys might have remembered this dude, right? The big dude with the chainsaw. He literally campaigned with it. That massive chainsaw. I think there's a clip of Elon even holding that thing. He devalued their peso by 50% on day one. And while inflation has come down since then, the average Argentinian family is still struggling to afford basic groceries. Okay? Like, every single one of these countries thought that it couldn't happen to them. Every single one had a reason to just keep the money printer going. Now, those are all dramatic examples. Hyperinflation, currency collapses, economic destructions, guys running for office with massive fucking chainsaws, okay? And I know what some of you are thinking. That could never happen in the United States, coach. Never. And you might be right about the hyperinflation part. But there's another way that a currency dies. And it's slower, quieter, and more dangerous. Because you don't see it coming until it's already happened. Insert the British pound. For over 100 years, the pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. The British Empire controlled all of global trade and everything was priced in the British pound. Then, this little old thing called World War II happened. Britain went broke fighting off the Nazis. And in 1944, at Bretton Woods, the world officially switched to the US dollars. Put that one down as a note, go do some research on Bretton Woods. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a deep dive on that. But here's what's interesting about the pound. The pound didn't collapse overnight. It became what economists call a zombie currency. So technically, it was still important, still traded, still used, but slowly and steadily losing its grip. From 1945 to 1971, the pound had just faded. One devaluation after another, after another, after another. One lost trade agreement at a time. One ally switching to the dollar at a time. No crash, no wheelbarrow moments, no crazy headlines, no Guinness Book of World Records, just a long, quiet decline that left Britain as a mid-tier economic power instead of the global leader that it used to be. And that, to me, is the more realistic comparison to what could happen to our U.S. dollar. Not a Zimbabwe moment, not making handbags out of $100 bills, but a British pound moment. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. So let's look at where the dollar actually stands right now. And I'm going to give you the real numbers. In 2001, the US dollar made up 72% of global reserves. As of the end of 2025, that number is a little over 56%. That's a drop of over 15 percentage points in 24 years. Now, 56% is still dominant. Nobody's replacing the dollar tomorrow, but the trend is clear. And here's what's accelerating it. During the pandemic, the Federal Reserve created roughly 40% of all US dollars in existence in about 2 years. 40%. All of that money in just 2 years. And every country holding dollar reserves watched that happen and started asking the same question. Do we need a backup plan? Okay, so central banks bought about 1,200 tons of gold. That's the third year in a row over 1,000 tons. Okay, this is like the important. This is that quiet part out loud that I always talk about. Okay, these central banks are buying gold, and for the first time, central bank gold holdings are now worth more than their U.S. Treasury holdings. 76% of central banks say they want to buy more gold. 75% say they want to reduce their dollar exposure. Those aren't conspiracy numbers before you hop in my comments. That's from the World Gold Council. And then there's the petrodollar. Saudi Arabia quietly moved away from the dollar exclusive deal that had been in place for almost 50 years. They're now open to accepting Chinese priced oil, and they're actively building economic ties with China. And on October 31st of last year, 2025, BRICS launched a pilot currency called the unit. It's backed by 40% physical gold and 60% BRICS national currencies. It's in pilot phase, like it's not replacing the dollar tomorrow, but I definitely think it's something we got to keep an eye on. Because if it exists at all, that tells you everything you need to know about which direction the world is moving for currencies. Every empire that has ever held the reserve currency thought that they were exempt. Britain thought it, Spain thought it, Rome thought it, and now here we are as the United States of America. So, here's what all this means in plain English for regular people. If the dollar loses reserve status gradually, not a crash, just like slow fade like the British pound, here's what that looks like for your life and my life. Everything imported gets more expensive. Gas, electronics, clothes, food that's shipped from anywhere other than here. Your savings lose purchasing power faster than the interest rate can keep up with it. That means your money in the bank is quietly becoming worth less every year. Housing and hard assets go up in price, not because they're worth more, but because the dollar you're measuring them is worth less. And the government's ability to borrow at cheap rates starts to disappear, which means either higher taxes or more money printing, or worst case scenario, both. That's not a doomsdayer prediction. That's literally what happened to every country we just talked about. The only difference is speed. greed. And here's the quiet part out loud. Neither party wants to talk about this. The left doesn't want to talk about it because their social programs require cheap borrowing. The right doesn't want to talk about it because their tax cuts require, again, cheap borrowing. Both sides need the dollar to stay dominant so that the government can keep spending money that it doesn't have. And instead of having an honest conversation about it, like the adults they're supposed to be in the room, they argue about everything else. Women and girl sports, guns, taxes, while the foundation slowly cracks underneath. The countries I just showed you, Germany, Hungary, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, Britain, every single one of them had politicians who said, everything's fine. Right up until it fucking wasn't. I'm not saying that the sky is falling. I'm not here to claim Chicken Little, okay? I'm just saying fucking look up before we start showing up with wheelbarrows at the grocery store, okay? By that point, it's too late. So, do I want old people to go without their Social Security checks? No, I don't. Do I think that we should cut, foreign aid to all of our allies? No, not all of it, but we could probably tailor it back some. We give $18 billion a year to Israel. They have free housing, free healthcare, better standards of living than we do. I'm just saying if a country's doing better than we are, we probably should take care of ourselves, right? Put our own oxygen mask on first before we start meddling in foreign affairs abroad that actually have no potential impact on us whatsoever. This is why the debt matters. Because as it continues to grow and our value of our dollar continues to decline, housing continues to cost more, physical goods continue to cost more. Those things are not going to change and reverse in the opposite direction. The only way that would happen is if we had a massive recession and then, dare I say it, even a depression. So here's what's working if you invested properly. If you bought hard assets in the past 6 or 7 years, you're probably looking pretty good. I would tell you, don't sell those. Borrow against them. Do the exact same play that our government is doing with our debt. And here's where I'll leave it. I'm not telling you that the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow. I want to be very clear on that. I don't believe that, okay? I'm not saying that the dollar is collapsing anytime soon, but I am telling you that the pattern is fucking real, okay? And the history is real, and the signs are there if you're actually willing to open your eyes and look at them. The question isn't whether the dollar will lose dominance, it's whether it happens fast or slow, and what you do about it in the meantime. What's happening with Iran, what's happening with BRICS, what's happening with gold, what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz. These aren't random events. They're all connected, and they all point to the same direction. I'm an independent. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to bring you the paperwork and let you make your own decision. That's always been the point. If you want me to go deeper on any of these BRICS, petrodollars, gold, how to actually protect your money, drop what you want to see in the comments. And if this is your first video in the series, go back and watch the Venezuela video and then the Iran video. They build on top of one another. I'll keep making content like this because I'm really enjoying it. And whether you're a business owner or just a regular old Joe like my uncle who's a plumber, I think you need to know this stuff because it's not what was taught in school. We have this fallacy that like there's a bunch of grown-ups in a room somewhere making sure that everything's working like it's supposed to. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes the train becomes a runaway train and there's no stopping it and there's no turning back. And the rich billionaires at the top aren't going to let us tax them to get us out of this. And you can't save your wages to outrun this. The only hope is that we have some elected officials that can actually wake up and make the hard changes and the tough decisions that need to happen. I want to give a quick shout out to Congressman Thomas Massie, the sole congressman who drove all the way back to D.C. during COVID, during the pandemic shutdown, when they passed that bill where they printed 40% of the money that's in circulation now, and he demanded a recorded vote because we were about to print almost half of our money supply over again on a voice vote with an empty chamber. Those are the people that we need to keep in Washington, D.C. Until next time, question everything. I'm Coach Carroll. Hustle, it's worth it.